We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
When you looked at the 96 Jags, they were certainly more of a vertical passing game, and they had some of the option route elements that came out of the run and shoot. That's why during that 96 season, there was a big blow up with Andre Rison, who was, there on their team for about the first half of the season, maybe a little bit longer, and running the wrong routes. And poor Mark had to throw some interceptions because Rison wasn't in the right spot, and they ended up moving on from him and really allowing for it to be the Jimmy Smith and Keenan McCardle show.
It's January 97, Jaguars at Broncos. This is Remember That Game, the podcast about sporting events that take you on a journey and maybe chart the path of the zeitgeist. I'm your host, Thomas Emerick, and my guest is Steve Palazzolo, PFF Head of Product and co-host of the PFF NFL Show. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is great. Anytime I can talk some Brunell and 96 Jags, pretty excited.
Going into this, were you thinking, I can't see how the Jaguars can win this game?
Yeah, it was a fascinating time. I mean, I was in my teenage years and had just kind of jumped on the Jaguars bandwagon. I wasn't really watching the NFL on a weekly basis until this season, and really more toward the end of this season. And I had seen the Jags play earlier in the year, and I thought, Brunell, exciting player. I'm gonna start liking this team. And I actually jumped on their bandwagon when they were 4-7, believe it or not. And I remember going back through the standings saying, if a few things happen, a lot of things happen actually, and they win out, they could actually make the playoffs. And that was the craziest thing, is they won their last 5 games. They get up to 9-7. They go in and beat Buffalo. So yeah, I was kind of expecting them to lose going into Denver, who was just a powerhouse at that time, led by Elway. But, I think just all the craziness that had happened along the way, anything could happen. And that's, part of the reason why I started to really love Brunell, the Jags. And, they went on a pretty nice run, after this 96 season.
And I was listening to you on the show yesterday, comparing the Titans to the 96 Jags. Both teams said Titans after they lose to Kyle Allen, Jags after they lose 20-3 to the Steelers. Both sneak in 9-7 at the end of the season. Which team do you think was more likely to get to the conference title game?
Well, probably the Titans, but, the Jags really, they were in their second year of existence, coming out of nowhere. Brunell was still kind of an unknown, even though he did get off to a pretty nice start in 96. But, the Titans had Ryan Tannehill go from, just another guy to one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And there really are a lot of similarities. The other thing that the Jags had was Natron Means kind of emerged as a power back in those 2 games with Buffalo and Denver. And, there's some similarities there, obviously, with Derrick Henry and what he's doing right now. So, anytime I can make that parallel to the 96 Jags, I'm going to try it. But I think the Jaguars coming from expansion in 95 and going on that run was still probably more unlikely than even the craziness that we're seeing right now.
Brunell, the league leader in passing yards that season. Ryan Tannehill, top-graded quarterback this season. And then Natron Means and Derrick Henry take over.
Yeah, and, I think football's always been kind of true in that sense. Well-rounded teams win. It's not necessarily, you have to run the ball X amount of times or yards, of course, but finding different ways to win. And, even the Titans being able to say, look, if you're going to give us the run, we're going to run. If you're going to give us the pass, we can pass. And I think the Jags, they were a team that really didn't have much of a run game, but when you can break off a couple 40 and 50-yard runs like Natron Means did during the playoffs and like Derrick Henry's done during the playoffs, that's extremely valuable, keeps defenses off balance. And, and gives you a shot. So I think the good teams learn how to they win in different ways, and I think that's certainly what the Jags did in '96 in their little run.
Offensive coordinator Kevin Gilbride in '96 with the Jags ran more of an Earhart-Perkins system with Tom Coughlin. Earlier in the '90s, the run and shoot with the Oilers. And like with Arthur Smith, who recently learned under LaFleur and that kind of Shanahan system, but it doesn't seem like he neatly falls into one bucket as far as scheme or offensive coaching tree.
No, I think there are definitely some similarities there as far as there's not a clean bucket. I think when you looked at the '96 Jags, there was certainly more of a vertical passing game, and they had some of the option route elements that came out of the run and shoot. That's why during that '96 season, there was a big blow up with Andre Rison, who was, there on their team for about the first half of the season, maybe a little bit longer, and running the wrong routes. And poor Mark had to throw some interceptions because Rison wasn't in the right spot, and they ended up moving on from him and really allowing for it to be the Jimmy Smith and Keenan McCardle show, which was, for the better, I think, in Jacksonville. So there were some elements of the run and shoot and just really a vertical stemmed passing game in Jacksonville. And I think with Tennessee, it is just an interesting time in the league because I think, in hiring processes and all that stuff, a lot of people like to focus on the coaching tree. It's the Sean McVay tree, it's the Shanahan and Kubiak tree. And I think the assumption is that everybody on that tree, those branches all must have the same philosophies, but the good coaches do evolve and they find, the best stuff that they've learned, and they evolve and they take a little bit from everybody. And I don't think there's a distinct style that defines the Titans. They've been a really efficient vertical passing team, play action passing team. They'll run, some wide zone stuff with Henry. They'll run him downhill. So they do a very nice job of mixing things up.
To further the parallels of the 2019 Titans and 96 Jags, Gilbride as these scheme diverse, many coaching trees, very different types of influences, being the Arthur Smith coaching tree game. I workshopped different names when I did the one with Eric Eager on the 90s Packers and Niners. The name was That's Incestuous. For this one, I'm going to go with 6 Degrees of Kevin Gilbride. I'm not sure which one will help me get advertisers.
You should be able to get something off of that.
yeah, 6 Degrees of going to sell, kind of like a little quiz game. So, Jaguars, expansion draft, first pick, Steve Beuerlein. What do Kevin Gilbride and Steve Beuerlein have in common as far as who hates them?
Oh man, who hates? I'm not nearly as good as Eric at NFL trivia. So I'm not going to be great at this game.
Start with the hardest one. So I actually stumped Eric on the first one. I go with the hardest one first because I guess I'm crazy. Buddy Ryan threw a punch at Kevin Gilbride on the sideline.
I remember that. I do remember that.
Because Brian didn't like the run and shoot the other side of the ball. And then Steve Beuerlein was Brian's quarterback in Arizona. And in the most passive-aggressive power move toward your quarterback as you can do, he exposed him to the expansion draft. And Jaguars took him.
I like it. Okay, that makes sense now. That makes perfect sense with that connection. I get it.
Oh, here's one. Mark Brunell was under Tom Coughlin, Kevin Gilbride, had the most passing yards in the league. Under Arthur Smith, Ryan Tannehill had the highest PFF grade. This quarterback had, like Tannehill, the highest PFF grade from midseason on under Tom Coughlin and Kevin Gilbride.
Oh, that would be Eli Manning. Then.
Yep, 2011.
2011 Eli was legit. If you're making that Hall of Fame case for Eli, it's not just those playoff runs, which were fantastic, but that whole 2011 season played under an incredible amount of pressure. Talked about Gilbride loves that vertical scheme. Eli ran it to perfection despite a bad offensive line. Yeah, he was really good that entire season.
And this one, I'm going to go a little bit of a stretch. I think it'll carry. This player scored the final touchdown in a playoff game in the tenure of this coach who was on a staff with Tom Coughlin.
This is 5 degrees of Kevin Gilbride within the question, isn't it?
Yeah, not the best worded question. I should have reworded that. So it's my fault. Anyways, I'll just run right into it. Keenan McCardle scored the final touchdown in the final playoff game Bill Belichick had with the Browns.
Wow. I didn't even realize that either.
Belichick's Browns knocked out Parcells' Patriots, got to the next game.
94.
Smashed by the Steelers.
Yeah, I remember that in '94. I don't remember McCardle getting the last touchdown though. That's great.
I had no idea either until like a month ago when I was like digging around PF reference.
You only had three. What do you have? Three catches, touchdown. I'm looking at it right now. He only had 10 catches on the entire season, and he scored a touchdown that year in the playoffs. That's great.
Yeah, randomly gets the last glimpse of happiness Belichick would have in Cleveland, perhaps for the rest of his life. We'll see. Oh, and this one's also going to be related, so you'll see like kind of a segue from each of them. Arthur Smith was on the offensive staff in Tennessee at a time where this person was head coach, was also a tight ends coach under Kevin Gilbride with the Steelers.
Is it Malarkey?
Yep.
All right.
There you go.
At least got that one.
And this one's going to be a little on the trollishly hard side because I forgot this guy's name until I looked it up earlier. I was like, oh, yeah, that guy. This man was the offensive coordinator when Arthur Smith got his first offensive job with the Titans, and also the offensive coordinator who followed Kevin Gilbride in Jacksonville.
Oh, that's I know who followed Gilbride. Chris Palmer.
Yep.
Chris Palmer. Yeah, he continued similar system, vertical down, stretch the field type of deal before he moved on to Cleveland in '99, I believe. Yeah.
The iconic expansion Browns team.
Tim Couch.
Tim Couch. So that's 6 degrees of Kevin Gilbride. If any manscaping companies want to do some sort of tie-in,
I'll pass along your info. I think you might get that.
I'm sorry, Kevin Gilbride, who is actually now the head coach of the XFL's team. He was on the same Ottawa Rough Riders staff in the 80s where he learned the run and shoot with another run and shoot guy, June Jones, who's now XFL coach of the Houston Rough Riders. So XFL, they're thinking their marketing opportunities just getting those old run and shoot guys.
Yeah, just going back to the 80s run and shoot. And honestly, I mean, the AAF and then, now the XFL, a great place to run those extreme type of schemes, like run old school run and shoot and just, kind of see what happens at the pro level, right? Now
to 1996, Kevin Gilbride starts as OC in 1995, the expansion year. And this is a podcast that wears its influences on its sleeve. The Jaguars go from expansion to AFC title within 2 years. So this segment is called How Hard Can It Be? You're Tom Coughlin, the GM and head coach. How did you get from 4-12 expansion team to a conference title team?
How? Oh, man. A lot of things had to fall into place. I mean, if you look at, what you get in the expansion draft with a guy like Mark, you get Mark Brunell, you trade for Mark Brunell, right? Just getting guys like Jimmy Smith and Keenan McCardle to emerge, guys who, Jimmy was, he had off the field issues, had injuries, had whatever else going on when he was with Dallas and everything, 2nd round pick, tons of potential, special teamer and all that stuff, but didn't figure it out until he got to Jacksonville. And McCardle, like you said, had the touchdown in the playoffs and everything, but hadn't really done a whole lot in Cleveland. And all of a sudden they're like the most prolific duo in the NFL for a stretch of time. Brunell emerges as a guy with a run pass thread. He could scramble. He was like Steve Young light, really, cannon for an arm. He could run that offense extremely well. You draft Tony Baselli at left tackle. They built a monster offensive line, and then the defense was a whole bunch of veterans that just kind of came together, combined with one of my favorite players of all time, Tony Brackens. As a rookie in '96 was just incredible. They draft Kevin Hardy. So it was just this nice influx of like retread veterans. They drafted extremely well with guys like Baselli, Hardy, and Brackens, and, found a quarterback, and before you know it, it's like, hey, year 2, you can make it to the AFC Championship.
Rally in the second half of '96, it all comes together. And then they go into Buffalo. We got some more Titans parallels. Patriots had made the Super Bowl for the past 5. And so had the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, right. I mean, I almost didn't even think of that exact parallel. This was like the last hurrah for the Bills. Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, Bruce Smith. It really was. They weren't as good as they had been during the Super Bowl run. You could tell Kelly was losing it a little bit. They just weren't the same team. And it was crazy, right? The upstart underdog Jags go in there, get a couple fluke plays that happen their way as well, and pull the upset. I mean, I remember watching that Saturday afternoon game. I was in high school, so high school I'd sleep in till like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. I remember almost like rolling out of bed for like a noon or 12:30 start and watching this game and just being so fired up to watch my new favorite team, the Jags, go into Buffalo, end their dynasty essentially, and pull the upset, as the pesky underdog. Yeah, like I said, a couple fluky plays. Then you've got, Brunell hits McCardle in the end zone for a great touchdown. You saw Brunell, showed his scrambling ability. He showed his scrambling ability more in the other games in the playoffs, but the downfield passing attack when they needed it. Pete Mitchell over the middle. Tony Brackens, I told you, he just made plays left and right all over the place. So it was fun. Yeah, Clyde Simmons though had the 20-yard pick six of Jim Kelly. And the whole game, it was like nobody expected the Jags to win. The announcers didn't expect it. I watch this game like once a year, though, just kind of like rehash it. It was a ton of fun.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Similarities with the wildcard game. Derrick Henry goes off for the 180. Natron Means goes off for the 170.
Yeah.
But then you go on to Denver, the number one seed, the number one offense, a team with the offensive player of the year, as I'm guessing Lamar Jackson is going to get. Jags were 12.5-point dogs. Do you remember where you were?
Was excited about the upset against Buffalo. I think I had definitely lower expectations going into Denver, but this was the beginning of Elway finds a running game, right? You get Terrell Davis with over 1,500 yards during the regular season. They're running that Shanahan system, and it's all kind of coming together for Denver, who had been dominant in the league. And obviously this didn't demoralize them too much. They win the next two Super Bowls for Elway to go out on top, but just a massive upset at the time. You mentioned 12+. The Jags were not expected to win, and there was a lot of cool stuff happening in this game. Brunell scrambling a little bit, making some big throws down the field. This was the cleanest game I think that Brunell played. He had a couple mishaps in the Buffalo game. This one was pretty clean, and they got the Natron Means game again, 140 yards from him after 170 the previous week, and that is absolutely where you certainly see those Titans parallels.
Kudos to the Titans for pulling it off, but though, unlike the Jags, the Titans do benefit from some variance. Ravens actually missing their 4th-and-1 attempts. You get some turnovers, and of course, the Broncos were just outgained, and the Broncos didn't even turn it over. The Jags just outgained them. The Jags even rallied back after being down early.
Yeah, and I think Denver missed the extra point early on. Then they scored a touchdown, missed the extra point, get another touchdown. Elway throws a dime to Shannon Sharp, and then they go for two. And I think Sharp dropped it in the end zone. So it's 12-0 in the first quarter. And it's like, all right, the number one seed is covering, right? They're dominating. And then the Jags just kind of crawled back. You get a big run from Means here and there. And they're, before you know it, it's 13-12 Jags. And those pesky guys are sticking around and, stuck around to the end of the game.
Elway would call it the worst loss of his life. Broncos hadn't won a Super Bowl.
Right.
And it was felt like the waning days of that run. Mark Schlereth, stalwart on those great offensive lines for the Broncos in the 90s, said that Brunell out-Elwayed Elway. Brunell with some big runs down the stretch, much like Tannehill this playoffs. Brunell gets a 40-yard run in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, that kind of showed his dual threat ability, right? I mean, he was he had a good feel for when to scramble. He was really athletic. That was right before, the following year he had a knee injury early in the season, and he just started to run less and less starting in that 97 season. But in 96, he's left-handed. He's number 8. He's only about 6'1". I mean, he really looked like a Steve Young type player. He was never as good or as efficient as Steve Young, as much as Brunell's my boy. He's my favorite player of all time and all that stuff. But, he really had that true dual threat ability. He led all quarterbacks in passing yards and rushing yards that year, for whatever that's worth, And then when they're just trying to run the clock out up 3, and he just throws the classic fade to Jimmy Smith for a touchdown. I mean, that he made big throws, big runs, like really when they needed in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, McCardell and Jimmy Smith both come through, both get touchdowns. This was, I guess, early in the Rod Smith run for Denver. He wasn't as worked into the offense that year. But Shannon Sharp, had the drop in the quiet day, 2 catches. Obviously, he'd have plenty of great moments in the playoffs outside of that. And Jaguars pull out the win. In the post-game locker room, they brought up things they took exception to. One of them was Woody Page calling them the Jaguars. And and no one's going to call them that after they win in Denver, probably regardless of whether or not they win. John Jerkovich, who was key part of the Packers win over the Niners in my last episode with Eric Eager, when he's on the Packers, he joins the Jaguars and kind of seems like a leader there. He tells I'm reading this in the Chicago Tribune from that day, Jerkovich laughed at the fuss. I think this team is into degradation. He said, we need to be degraded.
Use that. Well, they were used to it, the way Tom Coughlin was running training camps back then and all that, right? I mean, that was like the big thing. Tom Coughlin comes in 95, and I talked to Pete Prisco every now and again. He was covering the Jags back then, and I think he did a really nice job giving like the oral history of the 96 season. I should have sent that your way before we got into this too. But, he was right there for all of it. And we've talked before about just how intense it was and how, Tom Coughlin was bringing the toughness back to football and all this stuff. So they had gone a ridiculous training camp in 95. I think it was a little bit easier, but still similar in 96. So, they were used to that, right? So they were used to their backs against the wall, even against their own coach, probably in their own mind. And, they played that underdog role extremely well. And that was, the game-clinching touchdown when they were up 3. It was 3rd and 5, and it was one of those, like, if you just convert, you have a chance to run the clock out. But the fact that they ran a fade on 3rd and 5, I thought, capped that underdog mentality. And it was like, I remember Brunell saying before, if they were pressing Jimmy Smith, we throw it deep, because Jimmy had such good, and Brunell threw a nice deep ball, but Smith just had such a good ability to track the ball, great speed, second gear to get under it. And that was like the classic, just put it to a spot, Jimmy will beat the cornerback to the spot and make a play. That's like one of the classic plays of my Jags fandom.
And I think Gilbride, and I think the Giants 07 Super Bowl against the Patriots, still plenty enough time on the clock. Gilbride, Manning say, no, Plaxico, fade. Let's take the lead now and basically put it away. The Jags going into the conference title game, much like the Titans, 7.5-point dogs. Except this time the Jags, unlike the Titans, have to face Bill Belichick in the conference title. Belichick, not the head coach, but Belichick managing defensive back for a pretty good unit, including Ty Law and Lawyer Malloy.
Yeah, it was funny because I'm from New England. I'm from the Boston area, and I did not, like, when you're growing up in New England, the Patriots weren't really a thing. When I grew up, late 80s, 90s, and all that stuff. I mean, they weren't even on the radar until Parcells got there and drafted Bledsoe and made them a reasonable team. So that was back when, games would be blacked out. And so when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, the Patriots weren't even on TV. They wouldn't even sell out. So they weren't even like a team for me to root for. And like I said, I didn't really start following the NFL on a week-to-week basis until probably the 96 season. So I jumped on the Jags bandwagon. So I'm sitting there, the lone guy in New England, rooting for the Jags to beat the Patriots. And, wasn't to be. My boy Brunell throwing the interception in the end zone to big play Willie Clay. That kind of turned things around. And there's a fumble return to kind of seal the deal for the Patriots late in the game as well in the fourth quarter.
find all that belies how close that was. 13-6, Jaguars driving for a chance to tie. They have a fumble, get housed on them. You got a 26 game, and then the end zone interception to Clay. Parcells and Belichick do what they do, make you use your left hand. The Jaguars that day, their top targeted player was not McCardell. It was not Jimmy Smith. It was their tight end Mitchell. 10 targets for about 60-something yards. So that's tying one hand behind your back.
Yeah, and they had played earlier in the season, and the Jags hit a couple Hail Marys on them. I think it was a close game in Foxborough early in the season. Patriots had already seen what they were all about, and they did a nice job taking away those top two receivers. And you just didn't get that. You didn't get the nature on means games that you got those first two weeks of the playoffs when he ran for 170 and 140, only 19 carries for 43 yards. So they took away the running game, took away the top passing options. And that was classic Belichick defensive type of performance.
The means was popping off 7-8 a carry in those first two playoff games. To end with a comparisons game, and there are quite a few similarities between the games so far this playoffs that other games just immediately pop up in my mind. Obviously, when you brought up in the podcast, the PFF NFL Show, we got Titans, Ravens, comps to the Jags, Broncos in 96. So I'm going to say the game and see if you can guess which game this playoffs that relates to. It sounds convoluted, but I think it's going to work out as eventually a full 30-minute game show on television. Sunday morning.
It'll get there for sure.
So what game this postseason reminds you of 2005 in Cincinnati? Kimo von Oelhoffen knocks out Carson Palmer, and the Bengals offense isn't the same. Steelers win in Cincy.
So which game this postseason is like that?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm trying to.
Quarterback
Carson
gets
Wentz.
knocked
So
out.
you got Seattle 17 and Eagles 9. Carson Wentz out after just a few snaps.
The two Carsons get knocked out, and we're robbed of a potentially great game. So this one's also has a tell. I'm hoping each of these have a tell. Otherwise, this is just a mean game. 2004, Drew Brees has his team with a home game in the Wild. They're third in point differential, but it was a loaded AFC that year. So they get a home wildcard game. They're hosting. They lose in overtime.
I'm going to have to say that's probably Drew Brees losing in overtime this year as well, right, against the Vikings.
Yep, the 04 Chargers, Marty Schottenheimer losing at home to another slight quarterback, Chad Pennington, and the Jets.
Wow, perfect parallel right there, right?
Yeah. So this one's going to be slightly hard, but not too bad. Packers hosting the Niners in 96. This is actually the same weekend as the Jags-Broncos game. The Niners are put at a 12:30 Eastern time game, which was fully unnecessary. There were two late slots, but they make Niners go to Green Bay. Steve Young loses toward the end of his Niners career, while Green Bay doesn't get much from Favre. Favre throws for fewer than 100 yards. They rely on the run game and beat the Niners.
So is that one of the Titans wins?
Yep.
The Titans-Patriots?
Yep.
There you go.
So that Jaguars-Broncos game was amazing because it was a weird weekend where you have teams winning where the quarterback throws for nothing. I think Bledsoe threw for 170 against the Steelers that weekend. Aikman 100 yards flat in the Cowboys win over the Eagles, and Brett Favre fewer than 100 yards in a win over the Niners. Giants managed to host a playoff game. Oh, actually, I wouldn't get caught up in who's hosting and who's away. But Giants, not the best quarterback in the Derby as far as playoffs go. It's 1997 with Danny Cannell. They make the playoffs. Good team defense. Hold a 9-point lead in the ball with under 4 minutes left, but Randall Cunningham brings the Vikings back for the win in the wild card.
Oh, is that Bills-Texans then?
Yep.
There we go. With
that
Deshaun Watson playing Randall Cunningham?
Yep.
And Danny Cannell playing Josh Allen.
Yeah, there aren't enough. I guess that's just mean from me.
Good research, though. That's well done.
Thanks, yeah. I'm not sure who it's mean to either, but it probably mean to Josh Allen. Yeah.
It's a parallel. It's what it is.
Yeah. And then I'll finish it out with two quick ones. Seattle, Green Bay. It kind of reminded me of other Seattle playoff losses where they run the ball when it's not working in the first half and then say, hey, Russ, rally us, and he almost does, kind of like when they lost at Carolina a few years back.
Yep. Similar to Dallas last year too, right? I mean, they just ran the ball like crazy against Dallas, and they wanted to run the ball even more, and Russ is just dropping dimes in left and right.
Seahawks don't have to go far for that comparison. And then with Houston, Kansas City, I've never seen like that first half, so I won't even try.
Yeah. I mean, I thought the closest thing was the Patriots-Broncos Sunday Night Football 2013.
Right.
Broncos get up 24-0 on some fluky plays. The Patriots didn't come back as quickly as the Chiefs did, but eventually did, and things evened out after a fluky start.
This has been another episode of Remember That Game. Please rate, review, subscribe, and check out more episodes.